So, stuff we're working on. One of the big questions that, or one of the big issues that people had with the game was that it's really dark, and you play the game and it's all covered with fog of war and it's all black, and we've got this big beautiful game with these big beautiful environments and it's all black. So we're rethinking that, and so basically there's two kinds of fog of war in the game. There's where I have been, but I can't see it right now, and there's where I've never been. And the where I've been and I can't see it right now is very dark black. We've changed that to be a much lighter color so that the game looks a lot brighter in general. And we've actually brightened the whole game. So we just actually turn the brightness up on everything. And it actually makes the game pop, makes it a little prettier, makes it feel a little bit more casual, but it feels better. The where I haven't been is where we're struggling a little bit right now. And there was the idea for, what if we covered all that with sort of tiles, like it was a board game? And then as I move forward, we see those tiles flip. It sounds good in theory. We mocked it up. Right now, it doesn't feel great because maybe it's not a great idea, but B, there's a lot of tiles and the game now covered with tiles. And C, some of the tiles that we made right now I don't think are real pretty. And we're struggling with, what do those tiles look like? Are they really saturated? Are they really what? So we're still struggling a little bit with what that actually looks like. And I'm not sure that we've gotten there yet. And the early versions of this are not incredibly compelling, to be brutally honest. So we're working on that, but that's something we're doing. But lightening the game up in general and making the where I've already been, but I can't see it right now, fog of war lighter, those two things were highly successful and make the game look better. Two, rethinking our boxy, ugly in-game AI user interface. If you look at our game, everything was, I guess, problematically made by me. Where I was like, this is exactly the data that I want to see, and I want it put as small as possible so that I can keep my map maximized. That was my thinking as a designer. The artists did what I asked, and what we ended up with was ugly. So we looked at that and we said, all right, let's rethink that. I got the team to rethink the UI. I would love to show you right now, but it's not done, but it's looking way, way better. It's much more sort of Baroque looking in style. It's got a little bit more filler, but we didn't cover the screen with the UI. It's still quite simple, but it looks a lot more like Callasia in the sense of looking kind of board gamey and fun, and I'm really happy with it. And in fact, one of the things that I did was I took a screenshot of Callasia and a screenshot of Last Regiment, put them next to each other, and I said, which one looks better? And Callasia won, even with its crazy busy UI. And Callasia had warts, but it actually had reasonably good curb presence. When you looked at the screenshots and whatnot, you were like, oh, it's like a board game, it's pretty. Like, it looked reasonably good. And when I looked at Last Regiment, it wasn't looking as good. It looked too technical. It looked too and it didn't look fun. It didn't look like, that's fun. So we're working on that with the UI. I'm actually really happy with how that's going. Another, we're rethinking the way that we're showing the player powers. There was a lot of confusion in the game of, you had this sort of line of things at the bottom, and some of them were traits that were just, something that told you about your character, but then some of them were things that I could actually do, and asking which are the things that I can do and which are the things that are just information about me. We've actually split those into two different spots. So now here's all the shit about me, oh, look, I can go on water, and I have a +3 against infantry, and blah, blah, blah. All of that is down at the bottom. But then next to the character, there's a bunch of sort of pop-out buttons that are, oh, you can turn somebody into a snake, or you can blow somebody up with a cannon, or you can throw a fireball at somebody. These are things that you can actually click on and do shit on the map with. Still in progress. I don't know if that's a good change or not yet. We'll know probably by the end of today. That's a thing that we're doing. One of the big comments, and actually it was one of the people who's in Discord. I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was Nitride. Was saying that one of the things that was really compelling for them about Callasia was the battle screen, which to me, I was like, I hated the battle screen. That was like the worst part of the game for me, like going to the battle screen and not knowing what was going on there and blah, blah, blah. But they were like, oh, but the animations were pretty. And I was like, oh, really? I didn't think so. But I realized that there was a certain level of being able to play the game and see interesting, fun animations for a new user is good street value. It's good curbside street value. And so how do we put that in without putting in another screen and all the other stuff about it that sucked. Because later on, people were like, "Can you just fast forward me through that?" Like people, one of the biggest comments I got was like, "Can we just not see that?" And we actually put a button where you couldn't see it, and everybody picked the button. So the question is, how do you get the value of that? And so we're looking at how the animations that are happening in the main screen, like when I throw a fireball or whatever, and improving those. We've got some work done on that. Not totally happy with it yet, but it's serious progress, so that's good. We're rethinking the way that we show aiming at things. I noticed when we were moving or when we were aiming, the way we were highlighting the hexes made the game look really ugly. I specifically noticed this when we were in Manila. We were on this great big screen. We had a crappy little trailer that we had put together, and it was on the big screen. And it was like right after a trailer of like League of Legends or something, like real big 3D AAA games. And it would be like, amazing trailer, amazing trailer. Amazing trailer. And you're like, ah. And I was almost like, can you take that down? And part of what made it look kind of fugly was the big orange hexes and stuff. So we're rethinking how we're showing that. Again, the work is in progress. I would show you, but it's not done yet. But it's actually coming along, and I'm getting reasonably pleased with the progress there. And I think we can get... And this goes back to my earlier discussion about what's important to our key user. I think we can get to a point where it's good enough. It doesn't look as good as, League of Legends or, some big AAA game with a huge team making it. But it looks good enough that I'm not ashamed to show it at a convention. I think we can get to that point. So there's that. One of the big changes is redesigning the way that we handle factions. And I'll be blunt. We're going to rip off Hearthstone hard. And I'm not ashamed of that. I looked at... There's two sort of ways to look at doing factions, and one of them is the Hearthstone way, and one of them is the Magic the Gathering way, right? And I'm sure a better designer would deconstruct that more and not use the names of the games, but I'm going to use them because those two games, right? If I play Magic the Gathering, everything is green or red or white or blue, and basically I say I'm going to play a blue-white deck. And that's going to have a bunch of blue cards in it. It's going to have a bunch of white cards in it. And the reason that works with Magic the Gathering is because they have literally hundreds and hundreds of each one of those cards. And so the number of synergies that you can find between a blue deck and a white deck are damn near infinite, right? And so, all right, now I'm going to play a blue-green deck, or I'm going to play a green-black deck. Each one of those, any one of those two color combinations creates an almost infinite number of possibilities. And you can do this because they have quite a few cards. And they do that on purpose because the whole game is designed to make you go out and buy cards, right? That's what Magic was all about. We don't have that. I don't have the artists to make that many cards. We aren't a free-to-play game. We're not trying to make people buy cards. And so having that system, which is largely what we had, right? We had the Red Keep faction and the Palava faction, and you could bring in units from either one of those. Having that system became kind of limiting because I found very quickly... these are the two heroes that I'm breaking, and when I bring these two heroes, basically I'm going to use these 5 units. And I broke down very quickly into this is how it's going to work, because the number of synergies that you can build is actually not that great in that system. Now, Hearthstone does a different system where they say, look, you're going to choose a hero, and that's going to come with some cards, and then you're going to have a big pool of cards that everybody can use that have more basic things in them, and the design is... Here, have this really specialized shit, and now combine that with some more generic shit and use the specialized shit to make the generic shit more interesting, right? That's a different way of looking at things. And the number of synergies that you can create in a smaller number of card situation is much higher in that. Just mathematically, it's higher. And even if it weren't, the kinds of things that you could do. So, for instance, I might want a small heal unit, right? So there's a lot of ways I can take a small heal unit and buff him and change him and use him in different tactics and ways that are interesting. But if I only have that small hero unit as part of the red faction, then I have to bring the red faction if I want to bring that, which means I got to bring the other guys from the red faction, blah, blah, blah. Or I have to say, well, all right, every faction needs to have its version of a small heal unit. And once I do that, the factions become less interesting. And you start being, okay, well, this faction has its tank and this faction has its heal. And by the end, you're like, well, all these factions are the same. What's the point of, doing this? And so what we can do instead is we can take a bunch of these sort of basic idea units, a small heal unit, a big heal unit, a big charge unit, a small charge unit, put them in the general category and say, all right, here's all this stuff. Now, here's a bunch of different small factions, which have, only four or five cards. But these are 4 or 5 very specialized cards that do very specialized things. So now I'm going to bring these guys plus a couple of these general units. And now I can create all kinds of different synergies with what happens when I use this specialized guy with this guy. And now, and this is important, later on when we start doing DLC, and we will do, if the game is successful, we will do additional content. We will want to charge for that additional content. Instead of saying every time I do a new DLC, I have to create a whole new faction, and those factions have to be the same size every time, because if I make one faction larger, I now have to go make new cards for all of the other different factions. That way of thinking creates a lot of work for us. And we know this because we did it on Callasia. When we built the Dwarven faction for Callasia, we had to build a whole new faction, and we were limited in how big we could make that faction by, we can't make this faction any bigger than the other factions. If we make this 12 cards, then all the factions need 12 cards, and becomes almost geometrically larger every time you add a faction, how much work is added when so instead we can say, look, the factions are quite small. It's a hero and like 4 or 5 units. I think in the end we came up with it's a hero and 4 units. Yeah, it's a hero and 4 units as a faction now. And so a hero and 4 units is a faction. We want to make a new faction. It's 5 units. I can do that. That's easy. If I just want to put out a card and give it to the users for free, let's say next Christmas we put out a special Christmas card, I don't have to worry about it. I can just say, here, have that card. It goes in the general pile. And nobody freaks out, and I don't have to make, how now I made that one card for this faction, now that card for all the other factions, blah, blah, blah. In terms of us expanding the game, it's way better. So we made that choice. I have not played the game with this choice yet. That was something we did last night at like 1 in the morning. We're still fixing stuff. We'll probably be able to play a version of that maybe later today. Do I have a name for what the unnamed faction is called? No, I haven't thought that far ahead yet. I'm not sure. We'll look at it. Mercenaries might work. I have no idea right now. I'm still in a game design space of, is this even a good idea? And I think it is. I'm reasonably sold on it. And I hope I am, because if I'm not, the team will kill me. So other things that we're doing. Rethinking some of the powers to better theme some of the heroes. As I made this change, we said, how do we make the Red Keep faction a particularly interesting faction? Red Keep, for instance, is the one that Tristan, the guy on a horse, is from. And so that faction is actually the highly mobile faction. Almost everybody in that faction has charge and has a troop with a longer move. And so this is your like hard-hitting, fast, smashing, straightforward Zerg rush group. Now, mixing those with some different, I guess for the moment, let's call them mercenary units, mixing them with some special mercenary units like a healing unit that comes with them, or a flying unit that supports them and does sight for them. You could make a lot of interesting, I know Ben hates the word, interesting synergies with that. So that's an example. So we've been playing around with powers and kind of reorganizing who gets what and where everyone goes. So everything got completely reorganized. That was pretty intense. Another thing that we did is we took a look at the way we build, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the way we were building before, and I didn't like how we were summoning. We had these summoning portals, and I kind of made an excuse in the story that that's where everyone comes from. They come from a summoning portal and blah, blah, blah. The game was all about these damn summoning portals. If you were to summarize our game in one simple sentence, I would say it's Hearthstone with a map. I've got characters that fight and interact sort of like Hearthstone. They have special abilities kind of like Hearthstone, but I'm moving around on a map. And when I say that, the map part is the original part. That's the part that no one else is doing. Even if I look at Faria is a good example of sort of Hearthstone with a map, but it's not. Faria is Hearthstone with a board, right? And it's a very set board, and the board is actually built and interacted with by the player, which is a very interesting design. I'm not putting it down. It's a great design. I like what they're doing, but it's not what we're building. When I think about what I play in games and what I want to play in games, when I play strategy games, it's all about the map for me. And when I play games like Lux or Europa Universalis or something, it's all about figuring out the map and new maps and all that other stuff. How do we make that map important? One of the things I realize is what's really critical on the map is where the buildings are and what the buildings do. And so we changed the way that buildings are built and the way that buildings function. One of the things I noticed is buildings just didn't seem that important. And what was really important was the portal, because that's where you summon your units at. Everything was about summoning units at the portal. And so I got rid of portals. They're gone. And so now units actually summon in the buildings, but they summon in particular buildings based on the kind of unit that you are. So if you're infantry, you summon at infantry buildings. If you're cavalry, you summon at cavalry buildings. If you're civilian, you summon at civilian buildings. And this same distinction between cavalry and infantry and civilian is also used for a number of the buffs and things like that. So this is a spell that only works on civilians. This is a buff that only works on cavalry, that sort of thing. And so now there's a real meaning to these buildings. I move forward, I capture that stable. Now I can build my horses over there. It has the side benefit, by the way, of speeding the game up a lot, because I don't have to drag all of my units from the goddamn portal. I can actually take over a building and summon people to building. Once we got down this road, we had an interesting discussion about how many kinds of building are there going to be? How many kinds of units are there? And, you know, we've got infantry, we've got navy, we've got cavalry, we've got artillery, we've got civilians, and we've got mages. So I'm already up to 6 kinds of units. That's a lot. And I kind of have to stop there and say, like, and we also have irregulars, which does not fit into any of these 6 categories. You're an irregular. This is where the giant mold slugs and the screaming horrors of the world fit in over here. Anyway, if we've got that many kinds of unit, how many kinds of buildings do we need to support them? And that's an issue. And where do the irregulars come from? Like, what kind of building actually creates a giant mold slug? What's the right building for a giant mold slug? What's the right building for eagles? It's an interesting question, right? And we didn't come up with a great answer to that until actually it was an idea by Nelson. He was saying, you know what? We've got in the game already the idea that some units are summoned by other units. Why don't we take the irregular units that kind of don't make sense like that and make them largely be summoned by mages and other units? And I thought about it. I'm like, that's actually not a bad idea, because it actually makes those units kind of more fun and interesting, because now you can't just summon the giant mold slug. You have to summon the mage that summons the giant mold slug. And that's how you get your giant mold slug. And so there's kind of a step before that process, which means, oh, this mage is important and I have to move this mage around. And that mage, and now I've actually got a building that I can move around the unit, or move around the map, and they can be summoning things. So I'm like, where did that giant mold slug come from? Oh, there must be one of those beast mages around here, because they make the giant mold slugs. And now I got to go find him. And it's actually kind of interesting. Is it actually good? I don't know. We haven't played it yet. But one thing that I did when I did the huge changeover of units last night was I made a whole bunch of units summonable by other units. And it also actually made a lot of the factions interesting. So, for instance, one of the factions is Silverwood, which is the sort of elven faction. They're the people who created the Woodspawn, which began the Woodspawn Cataclysm, and it's story stuff. Anyway, they're elves that make things out of the woods. And so I said, their thing is they're all about transforming and summoning and healing. That's what they do. And so all of the main units that come with that faction are like mages that summon creatures or transform creatures or heal creatures. And now they have a real flavor, comparing them to, say, Red Keep, which is just like dudes on horses that kick ass, right? That's what they do. You want Red Keep, you get dudes with horses that kick ass. But you get the Silverwood guys, they're not as strong, but they have these kind of cool powers of summoning people, and they can move around in the woods and summon things in the woods. Another direction that I went was with Ivoria, which is the jungle, and there's a mage in the jungle. And so with Ivoria, I went the direction of they make monkeys, right? Because the monkeys are cool, right? Monkeys. And so monkeys. Anyway, so they make these monkeys, and then the monkeys actually upgrade and change into different kinds of monkeys. And then there's monkeys riding monkeys. And when you kill the monkeys riding monkeys, it makes more monkeys. And so, like, it's this idea of this, like, horde of monkeys, you know, and that thing. And unless you're Ivoria, you don't get the monkeys. And so once you have the monkeys, you can make more monkeys, and the monkeys can run around in the jungle and make more monkeys. We'll see whether or not that's fun or not, but it gives a flavor to Ivoria. Oh, I play Ivoria because I like the monkeys. Monkeys. Anyway, so that's the monkey thing. Is it a good idea? Does it work? Don't know. We're going to play. We're going to find out. Hopefully next week we'll have all this to show you and it'll be good. It's all torn apart and unplayable right now. This is what we're going to be doing the rest of the day, is fixing all this stuff. There we go. That is the stream for today.